Good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation, Destination Canada, Population U. My name is Bruno Dupeyron and I'm a professor here at JSGS. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's event as the moderator. The Johnson Schema Graduate School of Public Policy, or JSGS, is a national hub for advanced study and research in public policy administration. We are a partnership between the University of Regina and the University of Saskatchewan that was based on the spirit of cooperation and collaboration that defines Saskatchewan. Since our inception in 2007, we have swiftly become one of Canada's leading policy schools for educating graduate students and public servants interested in and devoted to advancing public value. At this time, I would like to acknowledge that while today's event is taking place online, JSGS physical homes are located on Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories, the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the traditional homeland of the Métis. In addition to these territories, some of today's speakers are joining us from Alberta, and I would like to acknowledge the diverse people across of the Treaty 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10 regions, and all 21 districts of the Métis Nation of Alberta. We are glad to welcome you joining us today from across Turtle Island and make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the land you reside on and think about and express gratitude for the place and for the people who have safeguarded it throughout time. If you feel comfortable, you are welcome to share your land acknowledgement through the chat. And as you do, please think about actions we can identify to actively engage in reconciliation to honor the land and its people. For those of you new to the EDI discussion series, I'm pleased to welcome you today. This series focuses on engaging current and future public servants on issues pertaining to equity, diversity, and inclusion in the public sector. This series is proudly supported by the Max Bell Foundation, who encourage the development of forward-looking innovations that impact public policies and practices. And if you'd like more information on the Max Bell Foundation and their work, please click the link in the chat. So today's discussion will focus on some of the main policy issues that our increasingly complex and controversial immigration system is facing in Canada, with a specific attention given to actors on the field who provide services to newcomers. How do they reduce barriers? How do they use a more culturally responsive framework in their daily work? How do they confront issues such as systemic bias? Those are some of the challenges we are going to discuss today. So our speakers will be sharing information on topics that may trigger or re-stimulate trauma to those attending today's event, and we recognize the need for safety measures to minimize the risk associated with triggering. So if you are experiencing distress as a result of this presentation, please look in the Zoom chat for a list of resources. To help our event run smoothly, we ask that all attendees stay muted and turn off their video during the presentation portion of our event, but then feel free to turn your videos back on for the Q&A. So the format for today's event is as follows. First, following speaker introductions, we'll have a brief presentation, followed by a moderated question and answer discussion to help us dig into some of the broader issues. This will give you, our audience, time to come up with questions for today's speakers, and following this, we'll open up to audience Q&A. So if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Zoom's chat function to send your question to myself, Bruno Dupeyron, and I will read out your question. Feel free to submit questions at any time during today's event. If you have any logistical questions during today's event, please don't hesitate to send a message to Karen Jaster-Laforge via Zoom's chat or email her at jsgs.events@euregina.ca. You'll be able to find Karen's information in the chat. Also, please note that as with all our EDI presentations, this presentation is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the JSGS website at a later date. So now for the logistics out of the way, I'm pleased to introduce you to today's speakers. So Lisa Jane de Gara is manager at Action for Health Communities. With extensive experience in the public sector and academic sphere, Lisa Jane de Gara is a passionate and highly engaged leader. And currently, Lisa Jane is an impactful and driven people manager at Action for Healthy Communities, where she leads a team of 10 over 4 work sites. Her current goal is to bring high-quality immigration and settlement services to small towns throughout rural Alberta. Maryam Karimi is Prairie and Northwest Territories SWIS coordinator at Saskatchewan Association of Immigrant Settlement and Integration Agencies, known also as SAISIA. Maryam Karimi brings over 20 years of experience in the settlement sector. She's originally from Iran, and her journey traverses continents, providing profound insights into diverse cultures. She holds a law degree from Tehran, a Master of Education, specializing in counseling from Manchester University in England, and a social work degree from the University of Regina. Her professional life began in Iran and expanded across the UK, South Africa, Calgary, and Saskatchewan, fostering her experience in Canadian refugees and settlement. Now, Maryam is a vital member of Team SAISIA, and her first-hand adaptability to new environments enriches her role as Prairie and Northwest Territories SWIS coordinator with empathy and insight. Her leadership transcends individual programs, collaborating effectively with organizations to make meaningful impacts in the settlement sector. Her passion for human rights and diversity and inclusion remains devoted to cultivating inclusion and supportive environments for newcomers navigating the Canadian landscape. Chloé McBean is Engagement Coordinator at the Alberta Association for Immigrant Serving Agencies, or ASIA. Chloé McBean is the Engagement Coordinator at the Alberta Association of Immigrant Serving Agencies and brings over 15 years of dedicated leadership in developing and enhancing impactful human services programs. Fluent in both French and English, she leverages extensive management experience to navigate complex issues and systems. Chloé, a devoted spouse and parent, is also an avid lover of music, movies, books, and enjoys the company of her family and beloved dogs. A dog, sorry, just one, sorry, just and Maroro Zinyemba is the Dean of the Faculty of Skills and Foundational Learning at NorQuest College in Alberta, and over 5,000 learners from diverse backgrounds enroll annually in programs offered under her leadership at NorQuest College. And prior to her current role, Maroro served as the Associate Dean in the Faculty of Business, Environment, and Technology. Maroro obtained a Bachelor of Arts in French Language and Literature and a Master of Educational Psychology from the University of Alberta. She obtained a Doctoral Education degree in Post-Secondary Leadership from the University of Calgary. And most recently, she published a book, Post-Secondary Leaders' Thoughts on Diversity and Inclusion, Now What? So welcome to our panelists. I'm pleased to turn over the floor to Lisa Jane de Gara, who will provide now some background and policy context for our discussion.
Just unmute myself. Thank you to everybody for being here. I appreciate the chance to talk about topics that I think are very timely, very relevant, and that certainly have been on all of our minds. Bruno, as a moderator, I'll just confirm we've got the screen good to go. Everything's shipshape in Bristol fashion. Fantastic. I'm glad. Excellent. So realistically, we wanted to have this panel as an opportunity to talk about arguably one of the leading policy issues, certainly in terms of public discourse at this time. Canada has a very long-standing immigration policy which emphasizes diversity in a way that very few wealthy countries do. For many decades, in many respects, Canada's immigration policy has been the envy of much of the world. But all policies, as any JSGS student would know, I graduated in 2016 from JSGS, so I'm a little bit invested on that perspective. But as any JSGS student will tell you, as any student of policy will tell you, policies by their definition have the capacity to be improved, to be assessed, to be evaluated on their merits, and at times changes in policy don't necessarily continue to serve the context for which they were invented. Click to here. I wanted to share a couple of pieces of data to kind of contextualize the conversation here. On the left-hand side, we have a graphic. This was published by Statistics Canada in late 2022. And essentially, it demonstrates really significant demographic change and demographic realities that have been true here in Canada. As you can see from the graph, at the beginning of the 20th century, in the period of especially acute colonial settlement here of Western Canada, there was a very substantial proportion of the population that was immigrants. Between 20 and 25% of Canada's population at the time was immigrants. Following the Second World War and the baby boom, that number was substantially reduced. And with changes to Canada's immigration policy, we noticed that it was a really substantial and significant change to the overall volume of newcomers that were coming to Canada, de-emphasizing the ethnic or language origins of the arrivals and emphasizing the skills that they could confer to Canada's economy. You can see since about the year 1995, a substantial uptick in the percentage of Canada that is immigrants, which is likely to continue to increase over the next 15 years, although by what degree, I think, is something that has become an increasing question in a lot of communities. At the moment, about 21%, 1 in 5 people in Canada, are born outside of Canada. Whether you call them newcomers, new Canadians, immigrants, the framing obviously depends on your specific perceptions, but 1 in 5 people living in Canada were born outside of Canada. When you consider the second generation, so that's 8% of Canadians for whom both of their parents were born outside of Canada, but they were born in Canada, and an additional 7% of Canadians who have 1 Canadian-born parent and 1 parent who's born outside of Canada. What we're sitting with is 36% of Canadians who either themselves are immigrants or have a meaningful and direct tie to the systems of immigrations. What's also really interesting to note that this graph doesn't necessarily fully capture is that the proportionality of Canadians who have either a direct immigrant experience or a meaningful family-based immigrant experience increases the younger that you are. In children under the age of 15, in some communities, a majority of children under 15 across in Canada are immigrants or children of immigrants, which I think really begins to speak to this context that we're seeing nationally. There have been a couple of really important developments in Canada's immigration system in the last couple of years. You've probably heard that the federal government intends to have 500,000 permanent residents settle in Canada in 2025. What you might not have appreciated is that that permanent residency program is part of a much wider slate of programs, which all independently comprise Canada's immigration system. There are several new programs that have been developed in recent years, which haven't necessarily seen their full impacts understood or appreciated just yet. For example, fleeing the war of Russia and Ukraine, Canada introduced the Canada-Ukraine Emergency Visa Program, the CUAET program, Authorization for Emergency Travel. And what's interesting to note is that as of present time, just over 210,000 Ukrainians have arrived in Canada using this visa process, but an additional 700,000 Ukrainians have the right to enter Canada via this visa process. That's a number that you can feel people being anxious about in social services context, because we've only really accommodated about a quarter of the people who currently have the right to enter via this program. one of the things that's really interesting about the Ukrainian context is that it's not a refugee program. I've often found myself correcting people about this, whether it's in community or when we're having conversations with municipalities. The Ukrainians that have come to Canada were fleeing war, but they're not formally considered to be refugees. They're on a short-term visa program. Technically, they have authorization for residency in the country for 3 years. What happens after 3 years in 2025? I don't know, but I do have a stomachache about it every single day. One of the things that's really difficult with a program like this as well is that it was partially based on an idea which, upon reflection, maybe is not altogether accurate. I have heard from a lot of sources, oh, the Ukrainians will all go home when the war is over. Well, that first presupposes that the war will be over by 2025, which maybe yes, maybe no. But in assessments of our client data, upwards of 90% of Ukrainians who have arrived through this pathway report intending to become permanent residents of Canada. Their intention is to remain in the country indefinitely. Now, the client intention and the government policy don't necessarily have meaningful alignment. And what that means long-term is harder to assess. One of the other things that we've noted is that the pathways to permanent residency for the Ukrainians specifically are largely inaccessible. The transition from temporary to permanent resident requires people to have certain certain points essentially based on their Canadian work experience and typically their language level. A very small minority of Ukrainian clients who've come through this pathway have that level of language and associated work experience, but an overwhelming majority do not. When we evaluated our client base, it was only about 6% that would be eligible either through that pathway or through family reunification pathways. So that means that 94% of 90% of people intend to remain without really any policy means to do so. And that's a worrying thing because when we have a significant distance between personal intent and policy intent, we're likely to see significant consequences. Interestingly, these other programs haven't received quite as much attention, but this idea of temporary residency for people fleeing emergency context, rather than full refugee status, but something like kind of a para-refugee status intended to be delivered on a temporary basis, has become increasingly popular in the last several years. There's a program that's specifically associated with Haitian, Venezuelan, and Colombian people intending to come to Canada. You might have heard about a program that was recently announced about which the details are not fully confirmed yet about people intending to leave Gaza. There's also another program that is being launched for people intending to leave the conflict in Sudan. These programs are not without their challenges because they typically, as temporary residents, these new arrivals who are indeed fleeing war and conflict are not able to access the full slate of social services that Canadian equivalents are able to access. Permanent residents and citizens and refugees, by virtue of being permanent residents, can access a full slate of social services. The people on this slide are not able to access that full slate of services by virtue of their status in the country. And this means that vulnerable diaspora communities might be bringing in family members in the hopes of saving them from war, certainly an entirely reasonable and noble aspiration. But do they have the means to support their families using the resources that are at their disposal? It's something that we haven't fully seen explored yet, and something that I think is likely to be examined in a much more comprehensive context in the very near future. Another issue, which you've probably heard a little bit more about, are temporary residents. In Canada, we have essentially two categories of immigration. We have people who arrive as permanent residents, and permanent residents have essentially access to the full slate of services as Canadian citizens do. However, a lot of arrivals to Canada are temporary residents. In the last quarter, 75% of new arrivals to Canada were temporary residents. Typically speaking, temporary residents are one of two categories of people. They're temporary workers who tend to be either under the formal temporary foreign worker program or the economic mobility class program. The distinctions are largely in the type of labor that they do, but their context is similar. And international students. What's really interesting to note is that if we look at the last 10 years, from 2012 to present, the volume in both categories has increased fairly significantly. Temporary foreign workers, there were 457,000 in 2012, and by 2022, there were 671,000. International students, there's been a much more significant increase from 240,000 in 2012 to 800,000 in 2022. 71% of those international students attend college and university in BC and Ontario, with the remaining percentage spread elsewhere in the country. By contrast, temporary foreign workers are spread, I wouldn't say entirely equitably, but they're working throughout the country. And one of the biggest challenges that we've observed when it comes to temporary foreign workers is that they're uniquely vulnerable to economic exploitation on the part of their employers. Most temporary workers who come to Canada come on what is called a closed work permit. So it's not just that they're working in the country, it's that they are only entitled to work for one employer in the country. So you can imagine that if you're working in a workspace that becomes unsafe or becomes exploitative, you don't actually have the ability to say, never mind, I'd like to work somewhere else. You have the choices of to remain in an exploitative employment context or to leave the country. When workers are abused, and unfortunately it does happen, there is a process by which those violations can be reported, but it's quite burdensome. We had a situation several months ago of a father and son who were experiencing significant exploitation, conditions comparable to modern slavery, in an employer here in Alberta. And our team had to telephone, I believe, 8 or 9 different agencies, repeating the story every single time, talking about, we had to have discussions with Service Canada, with the Alberta Labour Board, with the Temporary Foreign Worker Advisory Office. I had to call the RCMP, all different entities, because there's not a single pathway for reporting. And the typical protections that are afforded to workers in Canada, they're technically afforded to temporary foreign workers, but in a way that's broadly inaccessible to most. So these 2 categories of arrivals in the country, they're here for a specific reason. They're hoping to work or to gain an education in this country. But a lot of demographic change has happened in a relatively short period of time. And again, we are potentially still grappling with the consequences of what that looks like, both for the experience of these temporary residents and for the experience of other residents living here in Canada. I wanted to end with this picture. I actually have this picture hung up over my desk. It's just behind my computer here. This is a photograph of me, that the little child is me, my father and my mother in 1995 on the day when my father got his Canadian citizenship. So when they talked about, the 7% of Canadians who have one Canadian and one foreign-born parent, that includes me. Hooray! I think this is an image that I really love, number one, because I think it helps to cement kind of the experience that my family has had, but also experiences throughout this country. Canada is uncommon in many respects among wealthy countries. We have an uncommonly positive consensus about immigration and its benefits. This has been true across political parties, across political belief sets, across provinces. But one of the things that we've observed in the last 18 months or so is a potential shifting of that political consensus to something that much more closely resembles other wealthy countries throughout the world who have increasingly negative attitudes towards immigration. I am a big believer in the benefits of immigration, whether it's socially, economically, or for the culture of this country. But maintaining that fragile consensus is not something that should be taken for granted. And when I think about experiences like the one that my family's been fortunate enough to have, I think it's something that we want to be able to sustain, not just for now, not just for next month or for next year, but potentially for the next 150 years in this country. So I'll leave you with that little picture, and thank you very much for listening. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Lisa Jane. That's great. So we'll now move on to our moderated questions, starting with general questions for all panel members. So first, could you tell us a bit about yourself, how you got into this field and your passion for supporting new Canadians?
And sure, I can start.
Yeah, sure, go ahead, please, Maroro. Yeah.
So thank you. Well, I think my first formal experience working in the language and settlement sector was at the Edmonton Mennonite Center for Newcomers, a settlement agency here in Edmonton. I worked there as a student, giving some admin support over the summer, the STEP program. But looking back, that's probably where this kind of passion was ignited. Also enhanced by my own personal experiences. I've lived and worked on 3 different continents, and so far, and there were several reasons that led me to do that, whether it's social, political, economic. And as you mentioned in the intro, I did my master's in TESOL at the U of A, which really cemented kind of my participation in this field. And so ended up working at NorQuest College, which is an institution that serves a large number of newcomers to Canada in the LINK program, which I'll share a little bit more later in this lecture. So I think when I look back, it was really starting with the work in the Mennonite Center and engaging my own personal experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Yeah, I can jump in. Hello, everyone. My name is Chloé McBean, and like I said earlier, I'm with ASA, the Alberta Newcomer Umbrella. So I've been with ASA and actually the newcomer sector for just over 2 years. So I'm actually pretty new to this field. Before that, I did some work in quite a few different types of human service areas. So youth, disabilities, crisis intervention, information and referral. And I think that the passion and kind of the theme takeaway that comes to my work at ASA is really my view that no matter who's being supported or served, so in my case now, newcomer agencies and by extension newcomers, I feel like genuinely the connection and coordination are really critical to positive outcomes. So people being connected with the right services and supports at the right time, coordinating amongst different stakeholders to make sure that there's that continuity of care for people that we serve. I really think that those are really critical to positive health and life outcomes. And also because immigration is such a complex and large system, which I know we'll be talking about later, that's why it's even more critical for us to the operative word, all of us to be on the same page as much as possible to make sure that immigrants and refugees don't get left behind. So that's kind of who I am in a nutshell.
So probably that would be me now. Hello, everyone. I'm Maryam Karimi, and my journey actually into the field of settlement work stems from a deep passion for helping newcomers to Canada succeed and feel welcomed in their new home. As an immigrant myself, understand the challenges faced by those starting anew and in their new life, I can say. This personal connection has fueled me by commitment to making a positive impact on their lives. Over the years, I had privilege of collaborating with incredible individuals and organizations dedicated to supporting newcomers. Through successful programs, I have had the opportunity to work directly with hundreds of newcomers, refugee immigrants under different categories, and we welcomed them to Canada when I started my work at Saskatchewan Open Door Society. That would be 22 years ago. So my dedication to supporting new Canadians is driven by the firm belief that everyone deserves the chance to succeed and flourish in their adapted home. This commitment motivates me daily to contribute to the holistic well-being of newcomers, and I'm excited about the prospect of sharing my experiences and learning also from all professionals in this session. Also, as the coordinator of settlement workers in the school SWIS program in the PNT region, I am affiliated with the Saskatchewan Association of Immigrant Settlement and Integration Agencies, SAISIA. SAISIA is a nonprofit umbrella organization dedicated to supporting settlement service provider agencies in Saskatchewan. In its role as an umbrella organization, SAISIA offers indirect services for immigrants and refugees while actively engaging with the stakeholders and representing actually Saskatchewan settlement agencies on a national level. SAISIA collaborates with other umbrella organizations across provinces to foster a collective approach to immigrant settlement services. Maybe we can talk about more services and programs later on when it comes to time. Thank you.
Excellent. And I mean, I think you've had a little bit of a flavor of myself and what I'm involved in, but specifically my family's own experience. My grandparents on my father's side were refugees that fled the Holocaust in Hungary for relative safety in England, and I think the reflections on their experiences have kind of informed my beliefs around refugee service and immigrant service. They were safe, but they also didn't teach their children their native language out of fear that it would mark them as other and that they would have a discriminatory experience in their new country. So those kind of experiences, I think, are meaningful in this wider context that we think about settlement of refugees. The first barrier is safety, of course, but then we have a whole lot of other questions about what long-term integration looks like, what it means, and what's possible when it's done effectively. Interestingly, the first opportunity I ever had to participate in the settlement sector was when I was doing my JSGS internship. So I was in Regina doing my internship with the Ministry of Education. I didn't really know anybody in Regina, so I thought I'd take up some volunteer work. And so I did a lot of volunteering with the Regina Open Door Society, incidentally. I don't know if there's anybody who's there on the call, but it was a lovely organization. I had a lot of fun working with them. And that began in 2014 and 2015. So quite suddenly, it went from being kind of a volunteering job, spending time with newcomer and immigrant youth, to all of a sudden we've got this surge of Syrian arrivals who've come. And so that was a really meaningful experience for me to think about, what does it, we have this big picture, what does it look like day to day? I had the opportunity to do some of the like really incidental English learning with the kids because I don't speak any Arabic, so we had to kind of bridge a communication somewhere. And then, you know, when I had the opportunity to take up this role a number of years later, it was a great opportunity to really think about serving people, of course, but I did policy for a long time. I love complicated things that are full of challenges, and immigration is that in spades. So that's basically my story, I would say.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Second question for you. Could you please tell us briefly who your clients are, knowing that depending on your works, they can be newcomers, they can be also partner organizations, and what kind of work, settlement, integration services do you offer to them?
So I'll kick us off. Well, at NorQuest College is a comprehensive community college in Alberta. And on campus, on main campus, I'd say there are over 75 first languages spoken on main campus, over 100 countries of birth represented. So that just kind of shows you that the learners attending NorQuest College really come from very diverse backgrounds, including newcomers to Canada that we'll be speaking about more today, as well as our Indigenous learners and international students. So as with any other institution, we offer programs, and we have about 45 or so programs that learners can take. But today, I guess we'll talk a little bit more about the programs within my portfolio in the Faculty of Skills and Foundational Learning, which are really the LINK programs of language instruction for newcomers to Canada. And that's an IRCC funded program. And so this is a large program in terms of the student body, the numbers of students we serve this term alone, so the winter term, we're serving about 3,000 students in the LINK program. This is, adults taking full-time, part-time, evening classes, online, in person, so all modalities are offered. We also have post-secondary programs, such as the Settlement Studies Diploma program, and that's where I got to meet Lisa. And so within our Settlement Studies Diploma program, we work really closely with our community partners and other organizations, so two of which are represented here today, Chloé through ASA and Lisa through Action for Healthy Communities. And so our students in the Settlement Studies Diploma program, really at the end of the day, when they're done their studies, work in the communities, right, serving newcomers in different ways. In addition to that, we also have teacher training programs. And so those individuals interested in becoming ESL, EAL, or ELL instructors and need their TESOL Canada certification, whether it's level 1 or level 2, can take that programming at the college. And so these are some of the programs that directly relate to newcomers that I will that'll frame my discussion today. So in a nutshell, that's, I guess, what we offer at the college: language and settlement services, preparation for working with newcomers within the community, and working collectively and collaboratively with partner organizations in Edmonton and surrounding, so including our rural and small urban centers, working with community adult learning partners throughout the province of Alberta. I'll hand the mic to Chloé.
Oh, you betcha, Maroro. Thank you for that. Yeah, so I'm really very excited actually to be with all my colleagues here. I think especially from what view is that ASA as an umbrella, and so the umbrella role, and maybe Maryam can, similar to what she said, is that really our role is to support agencies that provide resettlement, settlement, and integration services to newcomers, specifically for our context in Alberta. So it's really about all the different services that kind of cover all the different touch points for newcomers. We try and, through a few different ways, which I'll get into, we try and help create a unified voice for newcomers in Alberta. So firstly, we do a lot of sector engagement. So in my role specifically, we do a lot of convening and supporting agencies to increase collaboration, coordination, and communication between key people. So this would include service providers, whether it's urban and rural, Anglophone and Francophone, varying levels of government, community organizations, and so on. So what we try and do through that engagement is we try and identify systems level province-wide challenges and really help try and set the stage for facilitating collaborative solutions, so that we can really have a shared vision of settlement and integration for all newcomers in Alberta. We also try and support the sector through our professional development. So similar to I know some of the other umbrellas in Canada, we offer different training, professional development opportunities, in some cases certification designed to specifically for the unique challenges of settlement practitioners facing in their everyday work, which I think it can be really important because especially if there's new emerging needs coming up, staff and agencies I know really appreciate having any kind of best practices or learnings that can help support them in their role as those things arise. We also have an extensive research and policy team. So we do a lot of evaluation and reports on emerging sector issues, not limited to rural. We also include in our research rural newcomers, temporary foreign workers, capacity building during COVID, overall health of the sector, many things. And also we try and conduct an annual settlement and integration sector survey for all Alberta agencies to really ascertain emerging challenges and priorities for Alberta service providers. And finally, another thing that we kind of try and support newcomer agencies with is we currently have Ukrainian settlement support. So it's a funding partnership between ASA and the government of Alberta designed to support Alberta agencies and communities to deliver projects and services of those trying to enhance the well-being of displaced Ukrainians without duplicating existing programs and services. So those are kind of some of the different services that we provide as an umbrella. Of course, depending on the different umbrellas in different province and territories you talk to, they might have different focuses. But I think overall, our mission as umbrellas is to support settlement and integration agencies to make sure that they have what they need so that newcomers can have that continuity of care and that they, as much as possible, don't fall through the cracks. So maybe I'll pass it on to Maryam.
Thank you, Chloé. As Chloé just mentioned about all the services through umbrella organizations, SAISIA also has a role in supporting the capacity building of agencies by providing professional development opportunities and advocating for the needs of the settlement sector in Saskatchewan. The organization extends its support to language service providers, rural settlement agencies, Francophone agencies, Ukrainian support, and conducts gender-based analysis to ensure a comprehensive and inclusive approach to settlement and integration services. Of course, reconciliation and bridging with Indigenous organizations is part of our history and our future. So we are right on that. So through these initiatives, SAISIA actively contributes to strengthening the overall capacity and effectiveness of the settlement sector in Saskatchewan. Collaboratively work with all of these great umbrella organizations, and actually some of the programs are very is based on collaboration like a GBA. So we work with MANSO, ASA, and I believe that's a national program now. So SAISIA is working with all of those organizations. direct service side, I would like to mention that pre-arrival and arrival services are for our agencies that they directly work with newcomers. So they play a crucial role in assisting newcomers in preparing for their arrival in Canada and also facilitating their integration into new communities. Of course, there are those services compass airport pickup, temporary accommodation, and support in finding permanent housing. There are other programs that agencies are offering: language training programs, employment services, youth programs, settlement in the school programs, and rural services. There are many varieties and a lot of programs and services that all organizations provide right now. So yeah.
Maybe I can talk on the meat and potatoes of what that frontline settlement looks like, because I think it's wonderful, I think, to hear, especially from our two of the national coordinating bodies that we have. Frontline settlement services, for those who've not had the chance to see it in action, is a lot of huge scale things and a lot of tremendously granular things. You are getting telephone calls from the principal's office. I manage a K-12 settlement program supporting immigrant and refugee kids in schools. So in a typical day, you're going to get a telephone call from a principal that says, "We've sent the consent form to this child's mother 3 times and she doesn't ever answer emails. Can you translate the email so the mother can get it?" I will make sure she signs it. I'm not translating an email. She doesn't use email. We're not doing that. So that's, there's the whole element of, I myself speak French in addition to English. I have a wonderful time speaking with our newly arrived clients who speak French as a first language, explaining to them Canadians are obsessed with forms. So some of it is like helping people navigate the actual systems of our country, which is, yes, you need a form to pick up your child from school. Yes, you need a form to confirm that you understand you can't have peanuts at lunch. Yes, you need a form that confirms where you live. Yes, you need a form, all manner of forms. We have elements of really, I would say the biggest piece of settlement is systems navigation. Here in this country, we have provincial healthcare systems. So if you are, let's say, this is a real situation we see a lot. You're a Ukrainian evacuee. You're not a refugee, so you don't automatically have healthcare when you get here. You have to apply for that healthcare. So what happens, for example, if you are 8 months pregnant and you have come from Ukraine and the baby could come at any day, and it takes between 6 and 12 weeks to process a health card? If with any luck, you call the settlement team and there's a settlement worker who speaks Ukrainian who picks up the phone and says, "What's your situation?" And then they, more often than not, pass the call on to somebody like me. And then I call my contact at the health authority and say, "Can we urgently expedite this health card? Because we're going to have a baby here in 48 hours. That situation has happened to me specifically at least 9 times. So that's pretty common. Or sometimes they don't have the health card and the baby's already born. And then you've got a family who's saying, "I have a $37,000 bill. How am I supposed to pay this?" So then I'm chasing down the physician and saying, "Hello, how are you doing? She's got a health card now. Can we reverse the charges?" So those are some of the meat and potatoes of settlement. Realistically, it depends on kind of the focus area that you have. When it comes to employment, sometimes it's, "Hey, your resume is really great, but in this country, it's illegal to have a photograph. You shouldn't mention your religion. You shouldn't mention your marital status." In many countries, that's not just standard, it's actually required. And so people are getting hundreds of job applications rejected because they don't know that HR professionals are required to reject their applications on the basis of our laws. So really, when we think about settlement as an undertaking, whether it's for an economic immigrant who's arrived with a master's degree who wants to be working in their field right away, or someone who's been born in a refugee camp and maybe doesn't even have literacy in their first language, in either event, settlement is about helping people navigate the systems that we have in this country or in provinces or anywhere to get what they need to be successful. It's really helpful, in my opinion, to have a policy background, because you need to understand why decisions have been made about building the systems the way that they are, so that when people hit a roadblock, you know who to call, who to email, who to pester, who to bother, and how to ultimately help the person to get the services that they need. I work in rural communities a lot. It's even more challenging because oftentimes systems that have been built up in rural communities are experiencing substantial deficits, not just for newcomers, but for any resident of those communities. So how do we begin to reverse engineer the systems development so that you can approach a system and say, "Oh, this doesn't work. How can we get it to work?" So that's a lot of what we do. And if anybody on this call wants to have a very long conversation after this about supporting immigrant children diagnosed with intellectual and learning disabilities, my goodness, I could write a dissertation on it. Maybe I will. So that's a lot of the day-to-day, just so people are aware.
Great, thank you very much. The next question is related to the second one. What are the major obstacles that newcomers face in order to get properly settled and integrated? And have these obstacles changed or increased in the last few years? For instance, the recognition of credentials, the requirement of references for finding a job, housing availability, housing costs, etc. What are the obstacles that you see that may basically weaken the integration of newcomers?
I can jump on that quickly with a couple of the things that I've noticed. One of the biggest challenges, and unfortunately a lot of policymakers and bureaucrats do not like this answer, is that digital skills are uniquely high among North Americans, especially, not even like English speakers. Our use of personal computers, like the ubiquity of laptop computers and other devices in our homes for the last 20 some odd years, is globally uncommon. Most people have a smartphone. They don't typically have a computer. And very often being in Canada is the first time that they've really had to engage with a computer specifically. So when people are being told, sign up for an Alberta digital ID, it's easy as pie. All you need to do is have a cell phone, an email, be able to do two-factor authentication, fill out a 57-question survey, et cetera, et cetera. So the digital skills component, I think, is massive. Even among people who were professionals in their country of origin, the level of digital integration I have seen is not there in most countries. And so people's ability to access systems is really limited. If you were able to go into an office, maybe you have more limited language ability or limited skills. If you're able to physically go into an office, you could probably find somebody who's at that office and kind of like negotiate your way through and figure it out. But if your only options are click here, error, click here, error, many people just can't access services at all. And so what we found, this is actually something that's coming up in the new funding cycle, so all settlement agencies are applying for 5 years of renewed funding, and we're all feeling crazy about it right now. Actually, this has been acknowledged by the government of Canada. It's now something that you can receive specific funding for, to say, okay, we appreciate that many immigrants and refugees here in Canada don't have the level of digital skills, and that this is a real barrier and a real impediment to their wider settlement, and especially to their acute settlement when they first get into the country. Because if you can't navigate those digital systems independently, your ability to navigate the systems those are barriers to the actual government services. So if you can't navigate the digital, how are you going to get access to the government services? Parentheses, if you're a policy developer, this is also true for older people. If your system is only accessible online, it's not accessible. You fail the GBA plus. Please, everyone, take this message home with you. It's really important.
Maybe I can piggyback off of what Lisa was mentioning, because I think, for example, Lisa's agency is one of the organizations that is at our meetings where we convene and we talk about issues. So I think definitely what Lisa mentioned in terms of digital literacy, digital technology access, these are all things that have happened and come up over the last 2 or 3 or 4 years. I'm focusing on those ones specifically just because I think a lot of unique things have happened in terms of increased immigration levels, unplanned arrivals, huge arrivals of newcomers, COVID. So there's a lot of really unique stuff that's happened in the last few years. I'm sure Maroro will have some things to say around language, but there's been, of course, a lot of barriers and obstacles around language, specifically around wait lists for assessments, for classes, and so that has had, of course, a huge ripple effect in terms of newcomers being able to move on to the next phase of their integration journey. Definitely, like Lisa said, in addition to clients' digital literacy and access, the same has been true identified by agencies and post-secondaries and organizations, where not only trying to make sure that their staff have the technology skills and infrastructure that they need, but also that the program or service is able to adapt in a digital or hybrid fashion, because that does impact how newcomers choose or not choose to access services. I'm sure she'll talk about that, Maroro, but in terms of accessing language services and assessments, there's a whole bunch of unique factors for newcomers in terms of how they perform online, what they can access, how do they submit materials. Like Lisa mentioned, there's a whole bunch of different assumptions or considerations that come from that. The same thing we've seen with employment. So of course, the whole landscape has changed in terms of how people are selected for employment, what the work-life balance looks like, what the working economy is. So you have a lot of employers and agencies and newcomers all trying to figure out how to make it more accessible for newcomers to work, especially the many millions of highly qualified newcomers coming to Canada, but adapting to the digital changes that have happened over COVID. And then also in terms of settlement programs specifically, mental health has obviously been a huge one that has come up a lot. Agents even mentioned that mental health is something that maybe in other countries is not even acknowledged. There's a lot of stigma. So to access services around mental health, let alone talk about it, is something that definitely agencies are facing a lot, as well as the mental health of staff supporting newcomers and maybe the vicarious trauma or secondary trauma that happens for them as a result of hearing some pretty intense stories from different maybe privately sponsored or government assisted refugees or refugee claimants. Housing, of course, I know that this was mentioned earlier, housing availability and cost of housing has been a major issue both in urban and rural areas. So it's like across the board, it's been an obstacle for people. And then also, like Lisa mentioned, I think there has been a lot of focus on trying to serve seniors, clients with disabilities, especially if you're coming in as a refugee. There's a huge increase in terms of physical or cognitive disabilities, doctor shortages in small centers. I'm sure it's the case in many provinces, but I know in Alberta, we've had a lot of issues with that. A lot of Ukrainian arrivals coming in Canada and just the state of healthcare in general. So in the end, what we try and do as an umbrella is on a regular basis, we try and check in with agencies to see which issues are pertinent to them to discuss and then try and go from there. And there always, some stuff never changes. Like, for example, language and employment is always something that's very critical because I think those are the two of the big foundational pieces for when newcomers come is like, if I need it, how do I get access to be able to speak English and how do I find work? Because that's like the main focus, right? But then there's other ones that come up like healthcare or anti-discrimination or those kinds of things. So those are some of the issues that we've heard brought up over the last few years from newcomers and newcomer agencies as an extension.
I'll jump in here, Chloe, just to actually add and build upon what you shared. I think really the key word here is access. On many levels. And so some of the obstacles that newcomers may face that we see, as Chloe mentioned, the wait list. When we talk about wait list, it's really wait list to accessing language training, right? Opportunities, accessing that link course that they may need. And so what we're seeing increasingly is longer and longer wait lists coming in. So there's only so much that one can, or an institution, organization can offer at a time. Then I would like to also think about the employment bit. So historically, we've always known, credential recognition, like you mentioned, has been an obstacle and a challenge. But I think there's an increased acknowledgement, awareness, recognition that there's intersectionality here. There's kind of intersecting points where a lot of newcomers, and it's reflected in this call for proposals that Lisa mentioned, the CFP, where we are looking at, or we're going to be assessed by those who are applying for these funding purposes, to see how EDI kind of concepts are embedded throughout the programming we're offering. And this is new. And so this is where I say this is that increased recognition and giving weight to recognizing that there's intersectionalities happening. There's a need to recognize that individuals are coming not only with a language barrier and employment barrier, but we do know of racism happening in the workplace, gaps in understanding how to best support newcomers with disabilities. The range really is quite broad. And so those are some of the things that do present themselves as obstacles. The digital literacy and skills is a big one. COVID really just amplified that for us. This is information we knew, but when COVID hit, it was really in our faces, knowing the disparities and the gaps that really showed up, in particular when I think of rural communities, just even internet access, never mind the actual device, but internet access in order to get services they need, the settlement services, employment-related supports, in addition to language training. So there is kind of what's on the surface, and then delving a little deeper into our underlying structures and structural inequities that do exist, that present themselves as obstacles for newcomers. I think I'll hand the mic to Maryam, is probably, if you want to add one or two things.
Thank you. So yes, my colleagues already discussed all the barriers and challenges. Of course, newcomers to Canada face a range of challenges when it comes to settling and integration into their new communities. Settlement and integration is a long process. Some of the common challenges, of course, include language barrier, difficulty accessing services, discrimination in the job market or in other different ways. It's important to address these challenges by providing newcomers with the resources and support they need to succeed in Canada. So we are talking about all these challenges. So how we can come up with some policies and support to remove these barriers. Another barrier I can mention here, because sometimes like my work is with small centers and rural as well, addition to urban centers. In smaller centers and rural, there are lack of resources. Transportation is one of them. It's a big challenge, especially look at the weather in Western Canada, in Prairie and Northwest Territories, I can say. So in this weather, or even summertime, doesn't matter, regardless of all those climate changes for newcomers, how each parent or a student can get to the school or to some of the summer camps. I recall, I think we talked to Lisa and we talked about all these rural challenges before. And the transportation is one of the resources and supports that we need to provide in smaller centers. We can imagine how students or parents can get to the programs, even summer camps. There are some activities, projects, great programs that is free of charge, is available to kids and youth during summer or winter, some of the winter sports and activities. So they cannot even get there if there is not proper transportation services. Lack of resources on mental health and well-being for the newcomers, how we can support families if there is some issues or they need more support for with counseling or to see a professional. So it takes time. In Manitoba, I have met with some of the SWIS service providers. They're kind of, I can say, rural areas is very, very similar to Saskatchewan and also some part of Alberta. So we need to focus on that. Those resources that are not available to newcomers, it affect their lives and their successful integration. When we talk about welcoming communities, there are a lot of things need to be done. Sense of belonging, how we can say we are welcoming communities and we don't have enough language support at schools or some other organizations. So we need to be more supportive and collaborative to work together to make sure, especially in Prairie and Northwest Territories, to remove those barriers. So, Lisa, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question is related to COVID, the COVID pandemic that has also deeply affected newcomers, especially vulnerable families and children during the lockdown. And so could you please tell us how newcomers were affected and how you have sought to respond to their needs, especially during the lockdown?
One of the things that I'll mention I've done a lot of work at this organization and more broadly about COVID vaccination. My organization, in collaboration with a number of other entities throughout Edmonton, hosted 17 vaccine clinics in 2021 and 2022. I think our total vaccination number was in the neighborhood of about 1,600 people, immigrants and refugees, along with some people who were, in conditions of extreme poverty, some people who were homeless, like a variety of incredibly vulnerable people who were not able to get vaccines through conventional means. So one of the things that's really significant, and it was that tension, this is a little bit of that like digital capacity tension, was if you need to go onto a website and have your name, postcode, all this information, you have to click, you have to, I buy a lot of streetwear, a lot of like exclusive hoodies and stuff, and there's like a lot of them, they sell out like this. When the vaccines were first coming, it was a very similar experience that you had to be really fast on the draw and click and be ready to do all these things. Many of our clients were not able to access anything in the first wave of vaccination because you really couldn't do it unsupported if you weren't super good with digital literacy. And over time, we also had another significant challenge about our clients' reluctance or hesitancy to get vaccines because information about COVID vaccines was only being transmitted in English, very occasionally in French. Information about COVID vaccines was addressing concerns that public health felt people ought to be concerned about, as opposed to what a lot of our clients reported being concerned about. And then also, of course, this question of access. There's a community here in Edmonton that's called Abbotsfield. I looked at the bus schedule, and you would have to take 2 buses, a total of 1 hour and 20 minutes one way, to get to the nearest like mass vaccination site that we had here in Edmonton. And so basically, we took kind of like a do-it-yourself approach. I had the great pleasure of collaborating with Canada Home Care, which is an independent healthcare organization here in Alberta, who basically said, we can get vaccines to people if you can bring the people to us. And we had to use kind of some innovative methods. We had hot dog barbecues in parking lots. There were people, I'll tell you, that you kind of grabbed by the shirt collar and said, have you been vaccinated? Would you like to be? You can do it right now. And so what really struck me with that model was the conventional models that suited 80 to 90% of Canadians, and we're very good at doing that, couldn't be shoehorned into serving this population because the means through which they access information, the means through which they access public services, the way that they thought about COVID, the way that they thought about, vaccines and all these kinds of things was so dramatically different. It was honestly like quite grueling work. In one of our vaccine clinics that we were hosting at our office in the parking lot, I had a protester come and scream at me and say that I was a Satanist, and we were doing horrific experiments on children in the building, and God's coming for you. So like we had a lot of interesting engagements with the general public. We were kicked out of more than a couple of public venues because of various anti-vaccine related issues. But the reason why I flag all that is I think that COVID was a really remarkable opportunity for us to think about. We have systems in this country that work really well for a large proportion of people. But when they don't work for the minority of people that we serve, they really don't work. And so how do we acknowledge that we have a mass scale, very high return on investment per head kind of system? It works for the vast majority of people. Acknowledging also that we need to have adjacent systems to serve members of the community who will not be reachable through conventional means. It was some of the most remarkable work of my life. I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to do it, but it was also so exhausting. You can't tell because I dye my hair, but like so much of my hair went white when dealing with COVID.
Lisa, I think I still have a bit of the white hair coming through from that 2020 experience. I'll just jump in here from just kind of post-secondary institution lens in terms of really the teaching and learning, right? And so when we went into lockdown, what we engaged in was emergency remote teaching, because literally overnight we had to switch. So this is very different from online, teaching and learning, which in some programs had always existed, but in the majority of our programs, especially with the language training piece, that's primarily the face-to-face, the interaction, etc. That's where most of the teaching happened. So winter 2020, switched from those traditional face-to-face classes, moved everything online. And this was done at great speed. So instructors had to, again, overnight immediately change or adjust their teaching for online delivery. And those of you in the kind of world of teaching, that it's not just a matter of putting up pictures online or PDFs. For this to be a really engaging lesson, there's more to it, the pedagogy behind all of that. And learners had to continue, with their coursework, whether it was foundational programming or post-secondary programming. They also had to adapt, really learning quickly and remotely. So again, looking back to those digital literacy skills. And to that, we noticed, it became really apparent, of course, that not everybody had access to a laptop to be able to engage the learning. And so what we did at NorQuest was to loan laptops to students in a whole big system. So the parking lot thing you're talking about, Lisa, that was the front of the NorQuest building, where we had students coming to pick up laptops so that they could then sign into Moodle or take their courses online. But it didn't end there, because even though some students now had access to laptops, we got reports, instructors saying, well, they're not logging in, they're not participating. And then you got to know a little bit more about the situations in which our students found themselves in, because, well, guess what? At home, kids were home, and perhaps this might have been the only laptop in that household. And so because the children were also now engaging in online learning, this is a laptop that then was shared among all family members, and so people taking turns to access education. And so when I talk about how COVID really opened up our eyes and put it right in our faces where those disparities lay, it goes beyond access to a laptop, right? The inequities that exist. And so beyond the coursework and language training, we also do provide settlement kind of supports that all moved online as well. Translation services were big in order to be able to reach a number of our students, especially those who are at the beginning levels of language learning, foundation to about CLB3, so Canadian Language Benchmark. We had to engage our community partners and other organizations to help translate documents, making phone calls in order to stay connected and in touch. Isolation was a big one for a number of our learners. And so building up just so the kind of communities, classroom communities where people could continue staying engaged and get the services that they need. So I would say really the big one on our end was that switch to emergency remote teaching that we had to engage in literally overnight.
Well, maybe Maryam. Oh, can I? Yeah. Just to piggyback off of what was said also. I think, yes, it was mentioned obviously that newcomers themselves, their needs were all different, comfortability level with tech. So agencies, I think throughout that 2 or 3 year process was agencies really trying to address language barriers, employment difficulties, technology related issues. There was this constant, like Maroro mentioned, this constant shift and evolution of like, okay, we've dealt with this, but now there's this unforeseen circumstance. All that paired with a lack of funding can make that evolution difficult. So that was also something I think that kept happening. The emphasis definitely of agencies when we would hear them speak would be like, there's definitely an emphasis on a holistic approach, considering trying the well-being of both clients and staff, adapting service delivery models to meet the evolving needs, and really trying to how to work together to do that. But that's definitely what it was. It was, I think, I don't know if I can speak for everyone here, but it was, we're just going to try this. We're going to try this. What have you done? Did this work? What do you do? It was a very organic process, which I'm sure was the case for a lot of industries, but that's definitely what ASA noticed from different settlement providers.
So when it comes to pandemic brought unique challenges for everyone, of course. And for the settlement sector was increased difficulties during all the COVID and lockdown. So settlement services responded proactively, actually, adapting to the evolving circumstances by embracing more virtual service delivery methods. It was difficult in first place because many of us were not familiar with WebEx, Teams, Zoom, and all of those virtual services that was available for a while. So we started to learn about that, and especially for frontline service providers, staff, we tried to provide those trainings. When it came to SWIS, settlement workers in the schools, because some of the students and parents, they got disconnected with the schools. Kids could not stay connected with their teachers or take any learning or courses, classes online. So it became very, very frustrating time for everybody. We got all so worried about kids. So we started to, first of all, do more collaboration, to work as a partnership with all those organizations, service providers. First thing was to make sure we can provide, especially I was working with Saskatchewan that time in 2020. I was not involved with the PNT. So in Saskatchewan, we worked with the family service in Saskatoon and Regina, and also school divisions. There is a program for computer for kids and schools. So we worked collaboratively. We started to provide physically those computers to the houses of the students. It was difficult, but all of the service providers helped each other, helped their clientels and organization. And some of the schools were so involved with service providers. For instance, was Prince Albert. Some of the school divisions came to Saskatoon, and they delivered some of the computers to the city and their students, newcomer students and families. So it was very, very challenging. Then I would like to also say, after the it came little bit down, everybody started to learn and get adapted to new situation, new lifestyle and everything. We looked at SWIS, and I heard from SWIS time to time, they cannot go to school even after opening. Schools were open. And so it was very challenging for SWIS to stay connected with students, because some of them go to school and were not even they were not welcome, I can say, to the schools. So we did in 2021, a collaborative research project was initiated involving the actually social work faculty at the University of Regina and SAISIA to delve into the impact and effectiveness of the settlement workers in the school, like a SWIS program. So collaboration and understanding the settlement challenges was one of the identified issues that we needed to work on that. Or SWIS could not be at schools anymore, or cannot be connected with the students. We needed to see schools environment more inclusive for SWIS. SWIS need to work at schools. So through that research project, many organizations, many school divisions were involved, and I believe the research report is available in SAISIA's website, if it's still there. I think that's a great resource for everyone would like to learn about that. Yeah, so maybe we go to next topic.
Thank you very much. So we have, or I have prepared other questions, but I'm mindful of the time. So if you agree, I suggest that we move to the audience Q&As, because otherwise I'm afraid we won't be able to ask them. So if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Zoom's chat function to send your question to myself, Bruno Dupeyron, and I will pose your question to our panelists. And we've had already gotten some good questions. So I'm going to start in the order I have received them. So the first question is about Ukrainian displaced people in Canada, and it stems from Lisa Jane's presentation. So one of the audience members says that with Ukrainian friends, she's wondering whether with their temporary status, will they be able to have permanent residency or to ask, or is it something that we don't know yet?
Isn't that the million-dollar question? So the short answer to this question is that the Canadian government introduced a family reunification pathway to permanent residency specifically for the Ukrainian evacuees. So if you have an adult relative in Canada who's older than the age of 18, and there's like a limited list of relatives, people who already have that, so like you had an aunt or you had a brother who was living in Canada, you came from Ukraine and now you're living in Canada, you can apply through that pathway. A vast majority of Ukrainians do not have that. The second category is that Ukrainians who meet the competitive standards for transition from temporary to permanent residency. So that's applied. The same standards are applied to temporary foreign workers, international students, and the Ukrainians concurrently. So typically speaking, you'd need to have, I think the most recent data is like a CLB of 8. So CLB only goes to 12, CLB of 8 is high. You probably need 3 years of like higher standard work experience. So again, the percentage of people who are eligible for that pathway is also very low. The secondary piece to that question, what's to be done? Settlement agencies across the country continue to raise this issue with the federal government, including myself. I've had this conversation with a number of federal decision makers. And so far, there's a bit of a feeling of like they're kind of waiting, I think, for something to happen. The situation in Europe is not going great for displaced Ukrainians within Europe. Poland has begun to refuse entry to new Ukrainian evacuees. Ireland is paying a one-time payment for Ukrainian evacuees in Ireland to return to Ukraine. We're all kind of waiting to see what Germany will do next. Short term, I think the likeliest outcome is that the CUAET visas will be extended for 3 additional years. And then at that 6-year mark, they'll maybe will be a more comprehensive decision. But yes, I get this question from Ukrainian clients almost every single day. It is a major concern for clients. It's a major concern for providers as well. I would love to give you a concrete answer. If I had a concrete answer, I would shout it from the rooftops. It's a really significant evolving concern. And I remain optimistic that we will get a conclusive response to that question soon. But we can't speak to it, unfortunately. But it's a really good question. It's just one that doesn't yet have an answer.
And maybe to piggyback off of that in terms, like, not in terms of the legality issues, but also in terms of funding for Ukrainian programs and services. There definitely seems to be a similar kind of like wait and see approach on what the federal government's going to do in terms of the government of Alberta's response, what they will fund, what we can apply for, things like that. So it definitely seems to be very much a wait and see case by cases approach, definitely in Alberta for funding for agencies.
I think in provincial side, yes, it depends on each province to make their own decision as well to support the Ukrainian population, definitely.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question is related to temporary foreign workers. And I have 2 questions. The first one is, if the temporary foreign worker program were reformed to extend worker protection, how would the Canadian economy be affected? For instance, in the US and Canada, we hear that without temporary foreign workers, harvesting our fresh produce prices would be significantly higher and be unaffordable for consumers.
Wonderful, wonderful economic question. And it's a shame that we only have 12 minutes left because we could talk about it for a good long time. Here's what I can say. In the prairies, at least, an overwhelming majority of temporary foreign workers do not work in agriculture. We do have a fair number of temporary foreign workers who work in meat production. So there's a substantial meat packing plant near Red Deer, Alberta, that has almost entirely temporary foreign workers. However, aside from those that are working in like a little bit of food production, here in the prairies, most people that work as temporary foreign workers work at McDonald's, Subway, Tim Hortons, and gas stations. That's like where people work. And so what I would put to the questioner, because it has kind of become like an accepted orthodoxy in Canadian economics, What I will say is that a lot of temporary foreign workers who are working in those contexts are not even earning the minimum wage due to various significant challenges to do with visas. There's a lot of employer-imposed SIN number fraud. There's a lot of, because it's like very much a gray zone in terms of enforcement, basically there are a lot of people who are working minimum wage service jobs who are not even being paid minimum wage. And so I believe, and maybe this is a personal opinion, not so an institutional opinion, if those entities cannot function without paying someone the minimum wage ordained by government, maybe those businesses can close. Like, that's a really dark opinion, but my perspective is, if you can only run your restaurant or gas station, essentially paying somebody $8 an hour because you're giving them room and board in a scary basement with no heating behind the gas station, maybe you shouldn't be a business owner. That's a personal opinion, not an institutional opinion, but I've seen enough horror stories to make that feel very legitimate.
Maybe if I can also like echo into like what Lisa said, there, like, it's interesting because of course it's not every employer who employs temporary foreign workers that acts this way, but there are some pretty sketchy behaviors that would not fly with the native born Canadian employee. So in terms of like how it would raise costs, if you have an employer asking the employee to pay $40,000 for an LMIA, it's almost like not even about the prices of services going up. It's almost about the employer making money off of the employee. And I know that from a lot of our agencies who support temporary foreign workers, and I know that I think Karen's going to be passing some resources after this session, and there is actually a really cool hub, a TFW hub that operates throughout the prairies. A lot of them talk about how, oh no, I've lost my thought. A lot of them talk about how a huge amount of the labor trafficking that happens in Canada is by temporary foreign workers. So I think like Lisa said, even if there's like the base law-abiding standards that employers are facing, if the prices are going up, then I think that's a sign that there's a system that's like some would say tantamount to slavery. So, and again, that's a personal opinion as well. Don't quote us. We are not representing our agencies when we say that, but it would be fair to say, I think that like, it's not even putting in more money to make sure temporary foreign workers, it's just almost like removing the barriers and like the financial exploitation that's happening. So I don't know if that answers the question. Probably doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say removing the barriers there. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, I was just thinking with the world of work changing, and just wanted to emphasize kind of that role of technology, the theme there, providing or making access easier to any kind of learning opportunities for TFWs, so when I look at access, so they're not treated as international students in that way, would perhaps also kind of, allow them to either add to a credential or retrain in ways that support our economy. So we're looking at frameworks of micro-credentials, for example, where somebody does not have to go through a whole 2-year diploma necessarily, but just get the just-in-time learning that they may need. And so I think providing access or reforming it in a way that there's more access to learning opportunities that are needed in ways that they can also be compensated fairly for that, for their knowledge and work would definitely help the economy in the long run. Thanks, Maryam.
Yes, I agree with you, and I believe we need to try to remove the barriers. For the Saskatchewan or provincial government, they have taken some steps, and I believe that is everything is available in their website. If you from Saskatchewan people, you can have a look at the government site. I can't take the time, that's going to take more time for the session, but maybe later on anyone can contact me. We can meet and discuss about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question is about job access. And one of the other members asks that immigrants are asked to have Canadian referrals and experience when they apply for jobs. Is it something that is policy related? Is it an obligation? Or is it something that employers request independently of the existing provincial policies, for instance?
There's no law that says you must have Canadian work experience. It's something that employers have independently self-imposed in the selection of candidates. I know it's something that we hear a lot of applicants are justifiably quite frustrated by, but there's nothing in any kind of legislation that says that you need to have Canadian work experience or indeed Canadian referrals. I have hired settlement workers who have just come to Canada and done Zoom interviews in different countries and stuff like that. So it is something I understand why there's a frustration. There's no legislation that mandates it. There's also not really any legislation that impedes it, I would say. So that's maybe something for consideration.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Next question is related to the relationship between some of the organizations, our panelists, ASIA, SAISIA, etc., and some offices that are interested in international relations or international affairs at universities or on post-secondary institutions. Are there connections? Are there relations between these settlement umbrella organizations and universities or post-secondary organizations such as NorQuest? How does it work?
I'm going to take a big wink here at Chloé because yes, and so there are relationships between organizations. I'll use NorQuest as an example, where we're a member of ASA, and so working closely with ASA and all the organizations within ASA, and so that's at that kind of provincial level. Then moving on to the north, kind of the prairies, working with other post-secondary institutions. We've done quite a bit of research work with, say, Red River College, for example, and then going on to the national level where you bring in academic institutions. So, for example, I sit on the National Language Advisory Board, and that has representation all across the country from universities and from colleges. And so really focusing on discussing matters as they pertain to, language, immigration, etc. So there's that collaborative effort really starting from within the city, the municipal level with the City of Edmonton, and moving to provincial organizations and nationally as well.
It is definitely a collaborative effort. We have been working very close with U of R research for the research project. I talked about that already. And for the colleges in Saskatchewan, all of them are connected with SAISIA. They work on same agendas together, and SAISIA leading some of the projects with the colleges. But that would be amazing if we have more connection with universities nationally to work together to improve the settlement services for the whole country.
Yeah, and I think I can speak as an umbrella. And I think it's very even demonstrated. Like Lisa was mentioning this huge funding application that everyone's applying for. ASA as an umbrella is applying as an indirect service provider. We are reliant and we will not exist without our collaborations, whether it be with local immigration partnerships, without settlement and integration agency, like without our stakeholders, we would not exist because we are kind of supposed to be this conduit in between liaison. And I definitely agree with Maryam in terms of I think that we as an umbrella have a lot more work to do in terms of collaborating with post-secondaries. Those that we do, I think it's very healthy and organic and very collaborative and respectful, like with NorQuest or Keanu College, a lot of the rural universities that support newcomers. And I think that we could definitely continue to do more around that. And I think that especially going forward, now I think our goal as an umbrella is to be even more proactive around humanitarian crisis response. Like for the longest time, the sector's really been about case by case, deal with it as it comes. But now it's like, no, okay, this is not going to end anytime soon. There's going to be unplanned waves of immigration for the foreseeable future. So how as we can as sector be organized and proactive in having a unified response? And so this is, for example, with going forward, I think having those collaborations more provincially with post-secondaries and others, I think it's going to be really critical in the next few years. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question is from someone who is working with post-secondary student services. And this person asks whether there are important things to know when dealing with international students, newcomers, or refugee students, specifically, I mean, as a category of students, how to support them the best way possible.
That's a very broad question that I'm not sure I can answer in
It is,
a
yeah.
minute or
So
so.
maybe if you have one or two suggestions.
Yes, I would say perhaps a focus really on meeting students where they're at and their needs. And so there isn't moving away from a one blanket approach fits all. Learners come from very diverse backgrounds, and there's need to recognize that and then provide culturally responsive services for that. And so if I look at, really could be from translation services in order to get and share information, all the way to, for them to be able to navigate our own post-secondary systems. How do you set in this application? How do you move? How do you access funding? And so having something, services that are culturally responsive, as well as really from, and I didn't speak much about this, but embedding it or looking at it from an anti-racism lens. So looking at our own structures and how do we attend to the needs of learners in ways that can actually help them move forward in their journeys. So I've really just kind of touched the surface there, but it's that recognition and awareness that that's how we need to, and we do, and continue to and should approach services dealing with students from all over, from diverse backgrounds. So not a one paintbrush fits all in our approaches and structures. It doesn't work.
And maybe one small comment that I'd add, I think, which is in support of all of that, especially when we're meeting international students that are undertaking these programs. I've worked with it both with JSGS and with NorQuest, asking the students what it is that their aspirations are and their goals are and their understanding of what the next several years of their lives are going to look like. I think, the part of the reason why this was called Destination Canada is I think that there's been a real push in media around the world, a lot of discussion, a lot of social pressure, a lot of family pressure. Many young people are getting a lot more of their kind of information and guidance about how to navigate an immigration and education process from like dancing TikToks than they are from official websites. So asking them, what do you think is going to happen next? And what's that going to be like for you? And what's your family hoping for? And those big kinds of questions, because the beliefs that a student might have when they arrive and the reality of their situation here in Canada might be quite different. And so in an education context, to make that part of the conversation, again, especially if you're doing settlement studies, what do you think this is going to look like? And how can we support you based on what you're hoping for? That educational attainment, maybe that experience after graduation, what does that all look like for you? And with that in mind, then maybe there's an opportunity to do more support. Parenthetically, a lot of students seem to believe they're going to become Bitcoin traders. So that's something that I've been like, please don't do that. That's not a good investment. So just something also to flag. Lots to think about though.
When depending on the province that the person who has this question, depending on the province that they're in, their umbrella organization might have access to different professional development opportunities or courses or resources that they could hook this person up with, in terms of just, if they're wanting to know more about immigration, there's resources. If they want to know more about the services available, there are resources. So depending on what they're wanting and where they are, they actually looking at their umbrella might be a good direction to start as well. Not for the soft skills, for the logistical pieces.
Mm-hmm. Perfect, thank you. And I see the time, so I'm afraid we just have the time for one more question. So I apologize to audience members for not being able to take all the other questions you have asked. So the last question I'm going to take is, in your experience, how long does it take newcomers to fully integrate into the Canadian context? And from my distant experience, it seems to me that this time
period a long process.
Increasing, no?
It's a long process, and honestly, it is related to the number of support that communities can provide for newcomers. If there is enough support for all those issues that we just talked about today, then integration would be faster. But if we just stay in the stage that there is not language the support, there is not health and mental health support, there is not transportation, and not job for newcomers. Parents come here for a job, so that integration would take, unfortunately, longer.
And it all depends on what you want them to be able to do and want to be participate in. I think like a person who feels fully integrated, fully participating in civic engagement is very different than someone they have the language, they're able to work, they're able to maintain their quality of life. Like there's a huge spectrum that can last years depending on what you want.
So we need, as a collective work, provincial, federal, all of us together, we need to understand the needs. We need to identify the needs and then provide the actual resources that can support integration. And if we want to really be supportive, providing welcoming communities, we need to be inclusive. We need to learn more about diversity, cross-cultural, and just fight with racism. That's, I think, one of the most important things in our area of work.
Yes, I think it's a journey, just like life is a journey. And so how one defines that for oneself, will vary. But I definitely would, concur with my colleagues here that depending on where one's at the journey and the immediate needs, and then as we move to self-actualization, what does that look like? And that differs for individuals, but definitely providing kind of those supports and being a part of that journey in ways that move the individual forward is key, especially in the, as they land, as people come in, and then journeying with them continuously. So I don't know that there's a particular year or mark that you can say, well, in 2 years' time, you should be at this point. We definitely, yes, we're measured, we have outcomes and all of that, but it's also where the individual is at and how much they need to be able to move from one place to another. Yeah.
I'll echo all the other comments with the general, it depends. But one of the stories I'll share, we have a client of ours who came to Canada as a privately sponsored refugee. She was a refugee, came from Eritrea. She was a child bride at the age of 14. She did not have the opportunity to attend school. Like, she had really complex, multifaceted challenges. And the last several years of her life in Canada, I think, have been remarkable to see. And so a couple of weeks ago, one of my staff invited her to a newcomers event. And very gently, she put her hand on hers and said, "Oh, I don't have any more need for those things. I've got a Canadian heart now." And I thought that was lovely. I thought that was a lovely way of framing it. We asked maybe if she wanted to be like kind of an organizer helper then in case, which she seems to have liked. But I flagged that because I think we can look at hard statistics, whether it's, income attainment or language or sense of belonging or any of these factors. But I think ultimately it depends on how the person feels. And for us, it's that opportunity to say, what would make you feel welcome? And let's see what we can do to get you on your way. So yeah, it depends, but depends positive.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we are nearing now the end of our time together. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank today's speakers, Lisa-Jane de Gara, Maryam Karimi, Chloé McBean, and Maroro Zinyemba, for their insight and observations on how we can improve on Canada's immigration system and how we can all better support newcomers to Canada. If you enjoyed this lecture, please keep an eye on the JSGS events calendar, where upcoming events and program information sessions are being promoted. Karen will share the link in the chat. So I would like to invite you to please join me in a round of applause for our speakers using the Zoom's reaction options. So to use my clap, applaud. Thank you. And please also join me in thanking warmly Karen Jaster-Laforge, Lisa-Jane de Gara, and Jamie Mayu-Bosch, who have not counted their hours of work to organize this event. So thank you very much, Karen, Lisa-Jane, and Jamie. So thank you for joining us today, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much.